The ins and outs of the cell membrane. Your cells are very picky. They do not let in any old thing. Your cells need to bring in things like water, oxygen, potassium, and cholesterol. Your cells need nutrients for energy and growth. Your cells also need to get rid of things such as waste or invading organisms. What keeps the right things coming in and removes waste and other materials? This is the responsibility of the cell membrane. The cell membrane may look like an unassuming piece of film holding the cell together, but its structure is complex and it plays an important role in getting things in and out of the cell. The cell membrane is primarily made of proteins and phospholipids and is considered to be semi-permeable because it allows certain molecules to pass through it, but not others. Basically, what semi-permeable means is that objects can pass through the membrane, but it's up to the membrane to come through. So it's not just going to let any old thing through. It gets to decide. Molecules are always in motion. The natural flow of molecules is to spread out from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And what this basically means is that it's an area where there's a lot of molecules in a small space, and they want to be able to spread out a little bit more. So a high concentration just means that there's a lot of them packed in together pretty tight, and a lower concentration means that they're allowed to move around much more freely because there's a lot less of them. So this process takes no energy to complete and is known as diffusion. So the simple definition of diffusion is spreading more widely. In chemistry and biology, diffusion refers to the fact that when a substance is dissolved in water, it tries to spread as widely through the water as possible. The dissolved substance goes from being highly concentrated to being as evenly concentrated as possible. When the concentration is as evenly spread out as possible, which means that there's about the same amount of molecules inside the cell as there is outside of the cell, it has reached equilibrium. So if you think of the word equal, inside and the outside both have an equal amount of molecules. That's basically what equilibrium means. So for example, if you place a single drop of food coloring in a glass of water, you will see it begin to spread out until all of the molecules have spread out evenly into the water. This happens because the high concentration of food coloring in that single drop naturally spreads out into the water, which is the lower concentration because it did not have any dye in it. A cell membrane uses two basic ways to bring in molecules: passive transport and active transport. When molecules diffuse across the cell membrane from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, so areas where there's a lot of molecules to areas where there are less of those molecules, we call that passive transport. Passive transport does not require the cell to use any energy. Smaller electrically neutral molecules have a relatively easy time moving in and out of cells. Only a few substances can easily diffuse through a cell membrane. These include oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water. Because water is needed in so many chemical reactions within the cell, the diffusion of water across the cell membrane gets its own name: osmosis. So let's just clear this up for a second. Osmosis is technically a form of diffusion, but because water is so commonly used in these reactions, when we're talking about the diffusion of water, we refer to it as osmosis. Within the cell membrane, you will find two types of proteins that help the cell bring in necessary molecules passively. So this means without the cell using energy. These proteins are called channel proteins and carrier proteins. Channel proteins let only specific molecules through a hole in the membrane, kind of like a channel. The size of the channel is suitable only for specific molecules, and it keeps out other molecules that are not the right size or shape. So kind of if you think about those little toys when you were a kid, where there was a bunch of shapes, maybe there's a circle and a square and a triangle and a star, and you had blocks. The star block would only fit through the star-shaped hole, and the circle block would only fit through the circle-shaped hole. It's very similar to that. Channel proteins are one way for cells to passively bring things from the blood vessels into the cell. Carrier proteins, on the other hand, will work only if a molecule interacts with the carrier protein to open it, much like a pet opening a pet door to come inside. So the molecule actually has to do something to this protein in order for it to open. It doesn't just stay open the entire time. We're going to stop for a second and go back up to this picture that shows osmosis. what we want to take a look at is the fact that in this picture right here, there's not a lot of inside the cell. So the higher concentration of molecules is outside the cell because there's only 3 inside and there's a lot more outside. And basically what these cells on the outside want to do is they want to get in here because they want to move from this high concentration into this lower concentration. So that's basically what the second picture is showing us. After some of the cells from the outside have moved to the inside of the cell, now if you count them, there's the same number on the inside as there is on the outside. So that means the cell has reached equilibrium. And at this point, the cell won't go through osmosis any longer. Right. So we are right here, if you are following along. So what about larger molecules or molecules with electrical charges? Cells can use other ways to bring things in or send things out. These methods require energy and referred to as active transport. During active transport, molecules move against the natural flow from areas of low concentration to areas that are already in high concentration. This process requires energy. For example, a tiny pump, known as a sodium-potassium pump, regulates or controls the concentration of sodium and potassium inside and outside the cell. This pump is particularly important to the brain to help send electrical messages from one neuron to another. Cells sometimes need to get rid of molecules too. This can happen passively, so without using energy, as in diffusion, or it can happen through active transport as well, using energy.